¿Qué tal? G'day, and thank you for engaging with this paper. Mi proyecto es un PhD que se llama Cinema del Pueblo. As a research practitioner, estoy interesado in understanding more about the role of cultural diversity y la relación con las soluciones al cambio climático. My research zooms into the nuances of creative practice by producing an original documentary film exploring community-engaged cinema and relational storytelling. The questions driving this project are underpinned by background research that suggests we are living through dangerous climate change. Ahora, hoy día. The latest IPCC report tells us that more than half of the world's communities are vulnerable to dangerous hazards exacerbated by today's climate change. Local attention is necessary for resilient transformations, and research demonstrates how cultural diversity is foundational for equitable futures. I passionately believe that documentary can do more in this space. However, we are limiting ourselves with the current format of cinema. Commercial cinema is too rigid for conversations, and panel discussions and Q&A engage in a one-way transfer of knowledge, from expert to audience. In critical communication theory, this process is seen as power imbalance, upholding hierarchy. Cinema is missing on an opportunity to galvanize the energy in the room once the credits roll. This energy is thinking, feeling, relational, embodied energy. I can imagine a community-engaged process in which Cinema del Pueblo is able to foster these energies towards genuine conversations between the audience. Motivated by collaborative filmmaking from the regions, con los territorios, yarning with Pachamama, Sentipensar with Mother Earth. We need more research to understand how intercultural cinematic interventions can help us propel a paradigm shift needed to address civilizational crisis in which we find ourselves today. This research emerges from my lived experience as a refugee migrant from Chile, raised here in Australia on the lands of First Nations people along the borders of Yunganbeh and Bundjalung nations. Situated within the cultural context of this work is my personal journey to identify as a person with Latin Aussie indigeneity. This PhD is multifaceted. It's a conceptualization geared towards addressing climate change through the lens of decoloniality and relational ways of knowing. In the time that I have left, I hope that I can expand on the idea of Cinema del Pueblo and suggest how it may play out on screen. This is an opportunity to highlight some of my thinking hasta ahora y avanzando. To begin, let's engage in decoloniality by situating ourselves in place. This video excerpt is narrated by my good friend Uncle Mark Cora, Minjambul man, cultural keeper and storyteller. Sentipensar is a hybrid verb, composed of verbs feel, sentir, and think, pensar, sentipensar. According to Escobar, 2014, it is to think with feeling through a heartfelt relation to Mother Earth and her rhythms. The concept was first introduced academically by Orlando Falls Borda in 1975, an influential sociologist from Colombia specializing in participatory action research. In a video interview released in 2017, he explains in his own words how he learnt about this practice while in conversation with a fisherman along the San Jorge River in the Colombian province Loja. He says, and I paraphrase, "The fisherman said to me, 'Look, It's true that we act with our hearts, but we also employ our minds. And when we combine the two, then we are sentipensante. For me, this is someone who makes knowledge with their heart central to their cultural identity. El pescador, the fisherman, also described this culture as sentipensante y aguantador, which I believe translates to tolerant. Why tolerant? Because a good fisherman is patient and in tune with the rhythm of the river, reading, feeling the rhythm of Mother Earth, feeling, waiting the right moment, using ingenuity to trap the fish. This is a beautiful philosophical practice that is widely used by scholars. And what I love about it is how it's a relational practice and developed in adapting to the rhythm of nature, perhaps useful for climate change solutions that prioritize biodiversity. When I'm surfing and waiting for a set wave to roll in, I am becoming sentipensante, feeling, thinking my way with the ocean's rhythm, using ingenuity to position myself in the best spot to catch the wave. When I am filming observational documentary, I am becoming sentipensante, feeling my way through the interview in rhythm with the storyteller, listening, thinking, feeling about their lived experience, waiting patiently for the right moment to move the camera or cut the scene. Sentipensar is something that we all do naturally, but to become sentipensante is something that we can do consciously, practicing our relationalities, feeling, thinking rhythmically as an interrelation with life forms.
My name's Colleen Wall. I'm a Dawakabi woman, and I've been raised by my mother the same way that her mother raised her. And some of the things that we talk about is about how we walk softly on our mother, as Mother Earth. And it's the importance of knowing your place and being able to settle in that place so that you don't leave many footprints or many harsh things that impact on the environment. Culturally, I am a senior Dawakabi woman from the Mary River watershed in southeast Queensland. My marang begins with my personal raison d'etre, reason for being, which is maroon, the burrowing sand goanna. My clan marang, Dawa, the stringy bark tree, and my nation is Kabi, or Kovai, the light honeybee. The stories tell about Brisbane as a place. They tell how ancient the land is and how connected everything is across the land. All beings rely on Gutta, the dark honeybee of Mount Cootha, and Gobai, light honeybee, along with its Kabi country cousins, Kovai, light honey, and Gilla, dark honey, as they are the major pollinators to the plant systems.
The excerpt that I just played was produced in collaboration with Arnie Cole. I chose this excerpt for two reasons. One, Arnie Cole speaks beautifully, and it demonstrates her Indigenous ontologies are akin to the practice of sentipensante. The second reason is that it makes a point that sound, and thinking about sound design, is usually the starting point for my work as a documentary filmmaker, because good sound is key to a good cinematic experience. Cinema del Pueblo is my response to some of my childhood memories during a time when my parents were young and involved in the struggles of Chilean people fighting for geographical and ontological freedoms. One of my fondest memories has significantly shaped my approach to community-engaged filmmaking here in Australia, and it begins with an action of protest and hope. The year was probably 1988. I was sitting on my father's shoulders at the age of 3 or 4, overlooking a sea of people during one of the largest protests in Santiago, Chile, a demonstration by thousands of people against the US-backed military dictatorship that officially ended in 1990, but remnants of that regime remain today. I remember many things from that day: marching, singing, waving banners in rhythm to Los Bombos, and lemons for the tear gas. Above all, I specifically remember singing a chant, in unison, echoing across thousands of people: El pueblo, unido, jamás será vencido. In English we sing, the people, united, will never be defeated. And from here this entire project stems, through the elusive meaning of pueblo. In Chile and throughout Latin America, the word pueblo is loaded with cultural and political friction associated with the memories of people fighting for the right to exist. These are living memories. There is no simple translation of pueblo into English because these are places with significant cultural meaning for indigenous and local people. By association, the word will always be contested because it is not simply a settlement, it is also a sentiment, underpinned by colonial histories of oppression, at the intersection of three elements: people, communities, and the spiritual and cultural relationships to the natural environment. These relationships will vary across different regions of South America because it's culturally diverse. From my living memories, pueblo is the will of the people, emerging from neighborhoods made up of mixed cultures, indigenous and mestizo, myself included. In the Australian context, the word pueblo is rarely used. In everyday vernacular, you hardly hear it. And this presents an interesting opportunity to reclaim cultural identity. In Australia, broadly speaking, to begin a conversation using the word pueblo will require first an exploration and explanation about Latin American people from culturally diverse backgrounds. Then the conversation could go in many different directions. One direction could be to talk about the representation of freedom, protest, and hope. Another direction could be to talk about communities, their relationalities with nature, place, heritage, identity. Or we could engage in a deep conversation led by First Nations people, reflecting on colonial oppressions that many cultures have in common, here in Australia and abroad. These moments of dialogue are engaging in reciprocity and sentipensar through an intercultural exchange. Cinema del Pueblo embodies this potential and demonstrates that social change is possible, evident by the downfall of dictatorships throughout Latin America. For me, talking about pueblos is to engage in an act of ontological decoloniality through the pluriverse of protest and hope. According to Arturo Escobar 2018, engaging in the pluriverse helps us to bridge ontological worlds. Quoting Brian and Mello 2020, the pluriverse generates multiplicity of worlds through the practice of different forms of life and ways of knowing. Through this lens, community-engaged practice is a self-determining process that enables local ways of knowing, supporting individuals to shape their own narratives. My role as research practitioner is fluid, navigating between facilitator and storyteller. Hunt 2014 describes Indigenous ontologies as, and I quote, stories told by people, the work of Indigenous thinkers, scholars, elders, community leaders, activists, community members. They contain a wealth of place-specific practice for understanding. Stories are tools that people, myself included, use to decolonize ontological terrains, exploring cultural continuities. According to Cordova in Navarro and Rodriguez 2014, Indigenous filmmakers across South America have been leading documentary practice internationally since the 80s by introducing video technologies into communities. They state, video technologies are powerful tools for expanding awareness of Indigenous cultural and political resistance on local and global scales, as well as the means of creative expression and cultural continuity. This demonstrates that Cinema del Pueblo has a history from which to build on. Cinema of solidarity, theatre of the oppressed, and Indigenous media more broadly. They all acknowledge the struggles and successes of Indigenous people, and people in Latin America more broadly, as well as those who have been dispersed internationally. Here, I find a home in the cinematic pluriverse from which I can begin these conceptualizations in solidarity with cultural diversity and cultural diverse life forms whose vulnerabilities are exacerbated by climate change at the hand of industrial capitalism driving the civilizational crisis we find ourselves in. I believe documentary cinema has a critical role to play in helping to facilitate visions for culturally diverse, equitable futures.